Welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoors. Thank you for taking time out in your day to listen to us, whatever you're doing, whether you're outside having a walk, driving in between, or just sitting, having a cup of tea and listening in. So today we are joined by Jim from Untamed Coaching, and I'm just going to kickstart with his LinkedIn profile strap line. Because life's too short for coffee rooms and crap coffee. Something that I wholeheartedly agree with. So briefly, Jim, who are you?
Well, nothing like a big, broad question to get us going.
Yeah.
How does one define oneself? I am a coach. Been doing it for about 6 years. Founder of Untamed, as you mentioned. Recent father of one, and I love getting outside, getting people outside, helping people reconnect with themselves, reconnect with the work they do, reconnect with other people around them, and generally having as much fun as possible.
Oh, that's fantastic, Jim, and it's a real pleasure to meet you. And that sounds fantastic. And I have to fully endorse the whole, the get out of the conference rooms, etc. I mean, it's far more creative outside. I think we can all agree. And yeah, absolutely love your those strap lines. But we're going to take you first all the way back, Jim, if you don't mind us to, because we didn't ask all our guests just to go back to your childhood and some of those earliest memories that you have of being outdoors, and you know, the why do you like being outdoors so much?
I think the why is I think it's just habit. I think just my conditioning, being raised. I mean, I was raised in the countryside. We had farms surrounding us, and we had a nice big garden, which we were very fortunate to have, and then the fields all around. And even though I was sort of raised in the 90s, where it started to get a little bit health and safety conscious, I didn't realize that because my parents never imposed that on us. So we were just sent across the fields and told to come back kind of when it was dinner time type thing. But one of the earliest, I suppose, most interesting and different memories was we used to go down to a cottage in South Wales in the middle of the Brecon Beacons, and it was a family friend's dad's cottage who'd built it. I think he was a cartographer. Like we're going back, he would have been like 100 and something by now, so long gone. But this cottage was really rough and ready. Like you'd go there, there'd be cobwebs all on the windowsills, dead wasps everywhere. You'd have to get the fire going. I don't think there's any central heating. The water was a bit dodgy. And we used to have to drive down this. We had a Land Rover Discovery, which I used to love. And we used to drive down this dirt track for it. When you're that age, it seemed like 20 miles. It was probably about a mile off the road, but it seemed like such an expedition. And I remember getting stuck one year because we had a little trailer with all our stuff in it. And then that got dragged into a ditch, and we had to like pull it out using a rope and a piece of wood that you twist. And like, it was just so much fun. We used to go clay pigeon shooting, and yeah, the freedom that was afforded to us back then was brilliant. And I suppose the risks, even though they were probably mitigated, that my dad took on, making his life much more difficult to kind of entertain us and give us that freedom was a blessing.
Oh, the delights of childhood memories and this concept of risk as well. I remember we used to have the Watson Sunday afternoon walks, which my dad would just have like free range, and we'd end up, I don't know, scaling down these cliffs and waterfalls that just seemed absolutely huge. And there was this time when my brother was like sat on my dad's head because he couldn't reach because he was so little. And even now they're kind of a bit renowned, the Watson Sunday afternoon walk. It's like, I'm all right, I've got something else to do.
Love it.
But it's this interesting balance between kind of growing up and your experiences and what you see as risk and kind of what freedom and adventure and your beliefs around that, because ultimately that's very much the shaping grounds as to who you are now, and just kind of bridging that gap between Jim the younger child and where you are now, and that journey from the past to the present, and how have you got there? And I don't know if there's any kind of significant milestones along the way that have really kind of shaped who you are now and what you do, particularly within your coaching work outdoors.
Yes, I think there's a lot of milestones in there. My life has been fairly convoluted and interesting and circuitous, taking in lots of sights and sounds. A lot of, I mean, I didn't really plan anything logically from a life choice perspective until I was probably 30 something. I had major. I've learned retrospectively that my life was in 5-year blocks, like kind of like from 17 onwards. I was like 17 to 21 was kind of 17 to 21 was like advanced education, further education. Then I moved to Whistler in Western Canada, and where I just partied and ski instructed and pretended to be a plumber and just did camping all the time. We did road trips. It was just pure fun and hedonism. So that was fantastic, and I was so grateful to be afforded that space. I didn't have any pressure from any family members to go and be an adult. They were like, hey, if I could have done this at your age, I definitely would have done. So that was amazing to have. And then, so that was 5 years, nearly to the month. And then I moved from there. I thought it was time to be an adult. So I shipped over to Western Australia. Partly my liver couldn't handle it anymore. My wallet couldn't handle it anymore. I'd broken my wrist. I'd got a concussion, broken my back from mountain biking and skiing, and twisted knees and all kinds of stuff. So my body, my wallet, and were just crying out for something a bit calmer. So then I moved to Australia, and I got a job in a mining company, and ended up running this engineering business out there, which ultimately, I mean, everything in life goes towards a decision point, doesn't it? But that was the most overt sort of factor in the coaching work that I do, because ultimately I ended up running this company, and it was very exciting to begin with, but then after a while it wasn't. I'm not an engineer. I didn't love the industry. Understatement. I didn't really love the people I worked with or who I sold for. I didn't know myself, therefore I allowed other people to not dictate, because that would be giving them too much sort of responsibility. I've got to take the responsibility myself, but just allowing myself to be shaped by my environment rather than the other way around. And I just ended up really misaligned, and misaligned is a nice way of putting it. Stressed, burnt out, frustrated, unhealthy was another way. And that was the major catalyst to say, right, this is not sustainable in the long run. I'd lost my kind of boyish energy. I think I'd lost a lot of spark. I was becoming angrier. Relationships were suffering. So that was a big turning point to say, right, what's next? And from that, I just went on this massive journey of like, who am I? What do I love to do? What are my gifts? What lifestyle do I want to lead? Who do I want to serve? How do I want to serve them? And the net result of all that was my now wife, partner at the time, we decided to pack up everything from Australia and start living as a nomadic existence. And we decided to I set up Untamed, Kim set up her own business, and we just had nothing in terms of possessions, no anchors, no nothing. We just did that for 3 years, which was absolutely amazing. And it was the result of me realizing how far I drifted from my true self, which was the catalyst for the work that I now do, because it's just so costly.
Oh wow, Jim, that's like a quick potted crash through, so much to unpack. That's amazing. And and I guess so many of our listeners and watchers will identify with many of those things that you've said, in terms of, well, early days of having space and exploring, and almost that hedonism type, say in Whistler. That's amazing. And then also in a way, Australia, and struggling to, as you say, almost other people having that responsibility, but you've got the responsibility to make those changes. But it's that realization, isn't it, in all of us trying to, and I'm the same as you. There was that moment where I decided it was time to take control and do what I needed to do. And I loved your word, in service. So who am I in service of? And that's such a great question for us as coaches to maybe not only ask yourself at the beginning, but keep asking ourselves, because I think that helps us to keep on a really nice, true path about what it is that we're in service of. And I think that's amazing. And so could you nicely segues us into today, and to kind of up to this present, the sort of your coaching practice? If you could just perhaps bring our listeners and watchers a little bit up to speed, sort of what that coaching practice is, how perhaps, your approach and some client stories respecting confidentiality, but sort of just give us an overview of kind of what's going on today for you.
So the nomadic thing was 3 years, and then early 2020 we decided to come back to the UK and buy a house. And I share that because that's the sort of, over the last couple of years, the model has changed a little bit. I was on Zoom, 2017 onwards, so it was all 100% remote or 99% remote, which it served a purpose. And I still think Zoom is very valuable, and you can have incredibly impactful conversations via Zoom. But I still get lit up the most from being face to face, and especially when it's outdoors, especially when it involves state changes like energy and adrenaline and time alone. So the more I've been in this area, the more I've kind of built up a connections list and a network. I've started to do more and more face to face, which is brilliant. So the general model is it's a mix between online and face to face, moving more towards the latter. And to give you an example of what a face to face looks like, got one next week, which is called A Day Away, which is so that's the 13th of July. I'm not sure when this will be released, but where it's a day where typically business owners, but they come to a really sort of inspiring off-grid place just down the road from here in Bradford-on-Avon, and phones away. And it's an opportunity to pause and check in, like, how are you getting on with your business? What direction are you heading in? Are you content? What are the emotions that are coming up? Because often we just bury them through distractions. So that's kind of a light coaching day where we'll go for a walk, we'll have some coaching exercises, and we'll be outside 100% of the time. And then on a more kind of intense level, I've got one coming up in September called Untamed Potential, and that's 3 nights. Also local to here, and that's again off grid. It's not a rule that phones away, but it's a request and it's a suggestion, because it will make a big difference. And it's a same thing, kind of a blend of outdoor adventure. So we'll be on the river, we'll be walking, we'll hopefully do some ice bathing or cold river dipping depending on the water temperature, and there'll be conversations, and there'll be more time for reflection. The more events I've done about probably 10 or 12 now, the more I take away and the more space I provide, because ultimately that's what people don't make time for typically. And then on the last night there's usually some sort of entertainment, which I won't share because it's quite fun, over a couple of drinks and a campfire, which I think every event I've ever run has had a campfire of some description. But in terms of the people I serve, the thing that links them all is the fact they have most of them have a really insatiable appetite for growth. They're the driven sort, so whether they're a business owner or an athlete or a military leader, they are the ones that have been like, right, I want to grow, I want to do more, I want to be more. Often it's coming from a place of fear. They just want to be seen and heard for whatever reason. And the work that we do together is often just, okay, this is what you think you need. Let's tap into, rather than looking at what you want to do with your life, let's look at who you want to be. And it's helping them reconnect with that true self and giving them permission they never needed from me anyway, to be the person they've always wanted to be, not the person they feel the need to be.
That place of fear. Oof.
It's massive. It drives so many decisions and so many actions and so many thoughts.
And often we are just so, at some level, unaware of it and in denial. And then actually when you start stripping it back, it's like, oh, hello. Interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So client success stories, what have you got?
This is a funny one. I've been asked this a lot over the years. And I used to, when I worked with clients, I mean, this is talk about a fear-based thing that's dressed up as something else. I always used to regard my success as a coach based on tangible changes that my clients had made. So if they come to me unhappy in their job or their relationship or their life or whatever, and if they didn't make any changes, I hadn't done my job. And I realized so much of that was coming from a place of ego. It's like, I need for them to make a change so I can see that I've done something and I can feel validated and I can tell people. And yes, a lot of people over the years have made changes, but the longer I've done it, the more I've realized actually they never needed to make the change in the first place. Maybe they do at some stage, but right now all they just need to do is reframe the myriad decisions, thoughts, conversations, beliefs they have on it, or they face on a daily basis. and the situation they're in becomes so much more enjoyable. They can derive so much more joy from the job they're in, the business they're running, the family they're surrounded by, the people they're surrounded by. So it's probably sounds like a massive long-winded cop-out way of saying I'm not going to share any stories. It's just the conversations I have where people are just they're like, I'm not sure nothing's really changed. I'm just having a much better time, which ultimately is so much more powerful, I think.
And it comes back to this whole definition of success as well. And actually, what is your judgment around that? And whether it is something, super tangible, or whether it is just more that it's that being, and actually existing in the world in a different way from how you've been programmed or conditioned, can be so liberating. And it's often that you can't quite put your finger on it, you can't quite nail it down. There's been a change in there.
Massively. I think there's a word that's underrated. I think happiness is overrated and contentment is underrated. I think contentment is like the sort of the steady line underneath. The happiness is probably fluctuates more. And I don't know what the definitions of those two words are, but if one can just be content with what you have, whether it's a relationship, the amount of money you've got, the job you've got, then so much less energy is wasted wanting something else, wishing you were somewhere else, being not present with your kids, and coming from a place of lack. So I think it's so significant.
And I can be awfully cynical when it comes to the differentiation between those words. And actually, within our capitalist society, contentment just does not work. Like, where's the growth? Where's the making money in that? It just doesn't kind of flow.
The amount of pushback I've had, because like I said, I work with the driven types. And what do you mean? If I don't want to settle. Settle means I'll lose my edge. I was like, try that on for size, see how you go.
So just circling back to something that you mentioned earlier, and it was around this idea of energy and states within the work that you do, and some of the activities that you do on some of your retreats seem quite full on. It would just be interesting just to dive a little bit more into that and how they are received.
It's a interesting time that you asked this question, because I had a team up on a retreat recently where we went canyoning. I love canyoning because it's a really, for the uninitiated, I suppose, it's like gorge walking. You're basically walking, jumping, scrambling, abseiling down a gorge, and it's a really cool activity because you can walk around some features if you don't want to. You can jump into some features if you want to. You can backflip off other features. You can climb higher, and so it kind of appeals to, or caters for, I suppose. It certainly doesn't appeal to more people, but it caters for different people. And but at the last trip I did, there was one person on there who lost it very quickly. Within the first dip into the water, the fear in her eyes was palpable. Thankfully she took a rest and came back and joined us later, but as long as the activities are pre-framed, I don't give much away before an event, because I find people get in their heads and they try and plan, and they fear monger, and they do all the things that you don't need to do. They just want to control more. But so I do try and limit how much people know, but it's all about pre-framing an experience, i.e. leaning into the discomfort, being open to saying no if you don't want to do it, but knowing the difference between genuine fear and danger versus discomfort. But yeah, canyoning is a great example. Whitewater rafting we've done. Sometimes it can be sedate. Sometimes you can kind of make it a bit more gnarly. And a lot of the time it's just walking, which is walking so much more conducive to coaching conversations than any other kind of extreme sport, because you've got time to think and be next to each other, and you're moving, and you've got the million miles of sky above you to do so.
No, that's really good, Jim. And do you use, when you're walking, I mean, are you using nature as a co-partner? Are you using that scenery, or what's in front of them, or on the horizon? I mean, do you use those types of techniques?
No, not really, not explicitly. Yes, it's a sort of co-partner in a silent partner, so to speak, because it's just there's I mean you've had Gary Pratt on. He'll know way more about the science of being outside than I will, but it just helps creativity, the movement, the ability to open up when you're side by side with somebody versus face to face. There's less of a direct energy there. It's a bit more open and flowing. But no, in terms of explicit, okay, let's have a look at how can we engage in the environment this way. That I don't really do any of that. I suppose the closest to that I do is I've started experimenting with silent walks recently. I've experienced that myself as a coachee, and it was really powerful. And it's something we don't do, certainly not in a group. Just let's be quiet for the next 10 minutes and seeing people's discomfort. But after a while, people start to tune into the noise.
That's really interesting. And we've not heard a great deal about that. That's a bit of a new. So is that 10 minutes, half an hour? I mean, tell me a bit more. That sounds, you can be whatever you.
Yeah, I'm really not the expert on this. I've only done it a couple of times with my clients in group exercises. I've had it done. I've been on a walk on 2 occasions, and I think maybe one of them was 20 minutes. I suppose I've done it for like 10 minutes, but I would suggest 10 minutes is probably not enough. If I'm going to be honest and reflecting back, I think it takes time for people to sort of settle into the rhythm. They overcome that awkwardness of like, should I be saying something? Are people looking at me? This feels weird. I'm next to a stranger I've never met, and I'm being quiet. So I don't know is the answer, but I would imagine that up to a point there is a the longer the better.
Very good. That's fantastic. And I mean, I'm intrigued with these, outdoor. What's the sort of the biggest challenges that you've had to face in the years you've been doing it? I mean, what's the sort of extremes that you've find challenging?
I've been very fortunate, touch wood, not to have any extreme events happen in terms of injuries or in terms of people wanting to go home or have a breakdown or anything like that. The one recently where I explained that the lady had a bit of a meltdown on in the canyon. That was a bit of a challenge, but not a huge amount. But for me, and this is the difference between when I work with teams versus when I work with a group of individuals. Massive difference. The team is there because the founder or the HR or whoever it is has said, I think we should do this as a group. And yes, they've bought in enough to be there, but a lot of the time it's an obligation. It's kind of, okay, well, this is my job, kind of, and they're there begrudgingly. Whereas when it's with a group of individuals, they all know me, they know my work, they know my values and my brand, they know what I'm about. They've paid their own good money. They've taken time away from their kids and wife or husband or whoever. So there's that immediate buy-in there, which means that as long as I pre-frame things adequately, which is critical no matter how well somebody knows me, in terms of what to expect, kind of rules of engagement, so to speak, then the number of challenges or kind of left field things is actually being minimized with a bit of luck thrown in there, I'm sure.
And taking that almost kind of behind the scenes to more of like a business perspective, like your coaching business, challenges there?
So from the coaching perspective, whilst on these events, you mean?
So more from like a business perspective. So like you have your business, you have your coaching business. Yes, we're there in service and coaching is our skill, and we are business owners as well.
Yes. So
more like a challenge around the business perspective.
How long have you got?
Top 5.
You mentioned before, Paul, about just checking in and reassessing. I think we need to do that at all times amongst all parts of the business. Challenges for me have been constantly evolving or constantly connecting with a deeper element of who I am and making sure the work actually catches up with that. Sometimes I have an epiphany, I have a realization about who I am, and my energy may change, but the work doesn't reflect that necessarily, or at least how my business is portrayed online doesn't change. Let's say the website may be 6 months out of date because the energy is slightly off. So making sure I'm constantly revising and being in tune with who I am and making sure the work matches that is a big one. Any business, it's the inflow of revenue and clients. I lived 3 years around the world with no fixed base. I've only been in the area a couple of years. I had a lot of clients over in North America, which I still have them, but far less than I used to. So there's the challenges there of like, okay, where's my audience? Is it local? Is it national? Is it international? Where do I focus? One of the big ones for me, and I think this might be useful for people listening, is how I market myself. And I went through a couple of different marketing streams and none of them ever felt right. And I used to I used to find someone who's good at marketing. They would then tell me what I should do from a marketing perspective, because it just so happens that's what they were trained in. And it was the tail wagging the dog on so many elements. And I then learned subsequently from a coach of mine that was like, the best form of marketing is the form that makes you feel the most authentic. So that's been a huge one. So basically showing up more as myself, not short, snappy adverts on YouTube or on Facebook, which never felt right, not the spammy messages on LinkedIn. But that has been a challenge for a number of years, is being honest with myself about how I want to show up, how I want to market myself, and making sure that's actually aligned.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for your honesty with that. It's something often as a coach, you kind of, you're drawn to coaching, to work with people, to be in service, because that's what you feel your purpose and your passion is. And then there's all the business stuff that you're just like, oh, okay, where do I even start with that? And I think this lag is really important to remember as well. You know, as coaches, we often have this thirst for learning. We're a bit of a kind of a learning junkie. So there are ongoing discoveries and transformations, and then how does that shift? How does that change? And then how do you refine that? And I will hands up admit that that's something that I struggle to keep up with as well, as my life goes in transition from being, you know, international athlete into not so much, though I still love running. And it's a different, you know, level of performance. Is it more is there an element of more spirituality within there? Where do you even go from that? So, you know, we're all work in progress ultimately.
And there's so many emotions and fears and doubts and stories and identity tied into, because this work is so personal, isn't it? There's so little difference between our business. If you are a sort of a solo coach, between the work, the business, and us as humans, and sort of being able to either untangle those or make sure they are both aligned and authentic is so hard. Because I'm sure it wasn't easy going from a sort of an international endurance athlete to doing less of that and being more of just this. You know, we have these stories of, oh, that my ego, my identity was tied to that, and now I lived, you know, nomadically for 3 years, and before that I was in Australia, before that I was in Western Canada, and now I say to a lot of people I live in a cul-de-sac and I have a Volvo, like, and I say it jokingly, but I have no doubt that's impacted me and my energy and how I show up, because like, is that like jiving with the Untamed brand? I mean, I don't feel hugely different, but I'm sure there's something going on there.
No, that's really good. And I think it is really great for our listeners. I do agree with you that marketing, and for people, we have many listeners who are starting out and trying to understand that as well, Jim. So, and I do agree with you. I've always believed people in the end buy from people. We're the human connection. I think you're so right. You know, marketeers, as well-meaning as many marketeers are, and they're all excellent. But in the end, they're not you, and they're not me, and we've got our own journeys, we've got our own experiences. And I think when people buy in and connect with that, then that's what people are, as you say, you rightly said, Jim, we're on our own, and we're trying to so when we show up and if we meet people, and marketers, people might be saying, well, okay, so if I don't do Facebook or I don't do spammy LinkedIn or whatever, then what do I do? But it's about getting yourself out there. It's about meeting people, connecting with people, and spreading the word. And I think, you know, that's that I think you make a great point, and I think that's something really useful for people to you know, hear. So that's really good. One of the things we would love to is, could you just expand a little bit, because people would love to understand a bit more about your grind to aligned, and that sort of talk us through the foundational methodology that, you know, you've developed through your coaching work, and just could you open that out a bit?
I can. I mean, firstly, to be honest, that methodology I sort of created, and then I was like, I mean, I suppose let's use that as an example. Let's be brutally honest, and I can use this as an example of doing something because I felt like I should and it not feeling right. So I could sit here and talk you through the methodology and make me sound all clever, but what I actually did was I created that methodology because I thought I had to, and I thought that's what the work should have, some form of basis that I can easily market to people. And it never felt right. I mean, the fundamental concept of going from feeling in the grind to feeling aligned is 100% accurate still, but in terms of, you know, the set steps that are involved in that, my work has never been prescriptive, and as soon as I tried to make it prescriptive, it didn't fit well at all. And I quickly never actually applied it in that order, in those specific ways at any point. But I can talk you through a general journey that I take my clients on. The first step is understanding themselves, is understanding what's holding them back, getting an idea of where they're at now. First conversation I have with people, I suppose this is the most prescriptive element of any of my work, I got this from a coach of mine, and I've unashamedly taken it and run with it. The first conversation I have with anybody is where I just sit and ask them loads of questions, and I write it all down on a big piece of paper. It ends up being this massive spider diagram of scribbled notes, and all I'm doing is asking as much about them as possible. Some of it seems irrelevant, some of it may not be, you never know, some of it will come back and round, and I use that as the basis for my conversations for the next 3 months or however long I work with them. But ultimately, it's helping them understand the stories, the narratives, the assumptions. Assumptions are a huge one, that have been determining or guiding their decisions and their actions, and ultimately is what's led them to where they are, and that feeling of misalignment or miscontent, or lack of, is it miscontent, malcontent, I don't know what the word is, or frustration, or often burnout. And then I suppose I think there's 3 elements to change. Okay, so let's go back to a methodology here that I said I don't use. 3 elements to change. Number 1, understanding the cost of the status quo. If you don't accept the cost of where you are right now, and that cost isn't sufficient, when you're not going to move. Because we love, better the devil you know, we don't like changing into something if it's just okay. Second element of that is that we've got to fall in love with an alternative. If we're kind of averagely in pain about the current situation, and our alternative is only mildly better, then and we need to sort of go through some radical changes to get there, we're not going to make those changes. For most of us, it's just too much. So those scales have to tip. It's like when you're selling into a company, they say that your product have to be 7 to 10 times better than the incumbent product for the companies to move to yours. There's switching costs, there's risk, there's opportunity costs, all these kind of things. And it's the same with any change in your life. So you've got to quantify the cost of what you're doing. You've got to fall in love with a new thing, and it's got to be something that's not just for other people. It has to be something you can imagine, to the point you can visualize it, you can touch it, and it becomes the only thing you could do, which is what happened when I set up my business. And then the third element is understanding the resistances that are going to get in the way. So for me to quit my job, engineering job with a good salary, car, phone, everything else, to then be a nomad starting a business from literally zero, the disparity between the two, I had to really quantify the status quo, the cost of that, and then I had to really fall in love to the point of, I want to be this nomad. This work looks amazing. This lifestyle feels amazing. I can't imagine anything else. And then I still had to overcome the resistances, the fear of judgment, the fear of failure, the fear of what have you. So in a very high level, non-prescriptive kind of way, that's the overview of the journey that I take my clients on. And those 3 elements show up whether you're going to create a tiny new habit or if you're going to change your life.
And methodologies within the coaching world is an interesting one. Having that structure, particularly when you're setting out on your becoming a coach journey, they are very, very useful. They really give you something to hold on to, so that you okay, what am I doing? Step A, ding, 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 talk it through. So it's where you kind of cut your teeth. And some coaching methodologies, there's thousands out there, and then it's almost like, well, I'm a coach, I need to create my own. And again, as anyone who's kind of listening and watching it's part of your coaching journey. How do you learn? How do you sift through all these different knowledge and information, and then actually what resonates with you? And I'll hands up admit, I've been on my learning journey and devoured various qualifications, accreditations, and then for me, it's coming back to what's true to me. And for me, it's much more organic, it's more fluid. But then actually, when you strip it back, at the heart of it, it's about change. And actually, how do you support that individual through change? And almost kind of taking the next step for you and looking to the future, and hearing about your journey and these kind of 5-year chunks. So what's in store? What's next for you? Untamed? Anything else that you might have in the pipeline?
I've got no idea. If one thing those 5-year chunks have taught me is to not try and second guess what the next 5-year chunk is going to be, because it's usually something intuitive, and it kind of a culmination of lots of thoughts when I'm suddenly just land and go, oh shit, I feel compelled to go and do X. So I don't know, but I want to bring more adventure back into my life. I know that. I do miss that. Obviously with a small child, things that is more challenging, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just takes different forms. I love the idea of micro adventures that Alistair Humphreys talks about, where you have an adventure sort of from between 5 in the evening and 9 a.m. whether that's just sleeping on a hill while camping or just having a play, in a river or something like that. So I want to do more of that. My wife and I have designed our perfect year just as a thought experiment to tune in again to make sure that we are communicating what it is that we both want, that we have an idea of what we both want, and that we are communicating it. And we did this exercise, and it was really cool how closely aligned our 2 perfect years were, which I know is not common, and I don't want to take it for granted. So we want to spend January abroad next year. We want to live in Morocco for the month. I want more sun in the sunshine, some winter sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to pull back a little bit in August, which I do plan on doing this year. I think I need to have more time for creativity and introspection. So this August will be the first time I do that. So that might be something I move towards in the future. Continue to do more face-to-face stuff and just be diligent about the clients that I work with. I think a bad client costs way more than the money that they pay you. So making sure that fear is not determining the clients that I take on.
Oh, that's really good. And some great stuff in there, Jennifer. And I wish you the very best of luck with all of those. They sound fantastic. And I think, August is such a great period. I mean, many coaches will say, not everybody wants to see any of us guys in August anyway. And I do encourage people to, if you can, it's a great time to go and get some sun, reflection, and just take the time. That's a great idea. Love the winter sun idea as well. Fantastic. And as we're coming towards the end, Jim, what we always love to ask, and you've given us so many great insights to today, is what advice, if we could take you back, would you give new coaches, people setting out, maybe just thinking about this, some are maybe a year in? What advice would you give them at this sort of stage for them to think about?
Well, I think the first thing that springs to my mind is persistence. I think I've taken it for granted how persistent I am. Otherwise known as annoying, probably to some people. but just chipping away the small, fall in love with the repetition. I mean, it doesn't have to be the same thing every day, obviously, but just the discipline of showing up. I think Woody Allen said 80% of success is showing up, and I firmly believe that. I've started to see the fruits of labor, the fruits of seeds that have been planted a year, 2, sometimes 3 years prior to that. We live in a very fast-paced, instant gratification world, which we all know about, and that doesn't help when you're setting up a business, because it doesn't matter how fast the world moves, it doesn't make clients or people come around to you or your idea or trust you quicker. Maybe the opposite. Maybe we are less trusting because of the amount of exposure we have to people's content and opinions. So just keep doing what you're doing, and be aware that most of what you're doing is probably wasted time for now, in the sense that it won't yield direct results, but it's not wasted time because you learn from it. Don't just get disheartened by the fact that I tried writing a blog for 6 months and no one bought anything, or I went to networking events for 6 months and nothing happened. Just keep doing what you're doing, whilst also tuning into, do you feel authentic and aligned whilst you're doing so? If you don't, then shift. But if you do, just keep it up, because it's getting over that dip that Seth Godin talks about, that the majority of businesses don't do. And if you don't do it, ask yourself, is it because you didn't want us enough in the first place? And if you didn't, that's fine, but be honest about it.
And beyond advice, any resources that have been particularly helpful for you, or anybody who's maybe influenced your practice that could be a bit of a share amongst our community?
Well, I went through, when I first started falling in love with this idea of being a business owner and a coach and everything else. I followed a lot. I went to a Tony Robbins event, which was life changing. I went to Date with Destiny. That was amazing. I joined a personal development group called M1, which is over in America. I don't know if it's still going or not. But the coach that I've worked with, we just parted ways recently. I just felt it was the right time. I've been working with him for fairly intensely, I think, for about 2.5 years, and he's been absolutely phenomenal. And his name, I'm actually wearing his t-shirt at the moment. It's Philip McKernan, and he's an Irish guy. He's now living back in Ireland, having lived in North America for years. And he's the only person I know out there. I'm not sure they exist, but I haven't connected with them, where they are truly showing up to help you be the best coach or the best person, and it's holding the space for you to flourish. Especially from a coach helping other coaches, which is partly what he does. A lot of the coaches to help coaches, they're just there to make your business bigger, to help you charge more. But he is all about helping you reconnect with yourself on a really deep level. And he's the best that I've experienced that personally. So I recommend people check him out. Yeah, that's about it. Other than that, lots of podcasts and books, all of which I consume a lot less of now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Jim, and some great stuff there. I mean, in terms of certainly the being authentic and continuing that fantastic theme and stuff. So how can our listeners find out more about you? We always love to give our guests the opportunity. Where do they go? How do they find out?
Well, my website is becomeuntamed.com. That's probably the biggest repository of all the info you need. It's got my events listed on there. It gives a bit of my backstory that I didn't share today, and an idea of the work that I do. And then I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook barely at all, or Instagram. So LinkedIn, if you want to contact me. And yeah, I suppose those two things. Those two things would be by far the best method. I'm on LinkedIn on a daily basis, pretty much. So I'm fairly accessible if people would like to connect and ask a question.
So what haven't we covered? What have we missed that is a glaring gap that you would like to raise?
I could tell you how I got to run the engineering business in Australia, where I pretended to be a control systems engineer for 8 months. But that is a very long story. But in a very small nutshell, the guy who hired me knew that I had a degree in politics, and he needed somebody on a secondment role for one of his clients. So he knew me loosely through a friend of mine, and I was working on a mine site in the middle of the desert in northern Australia, in Western Australia, but in the north. And he said, "I need you to come back, fly home tomorrow, and start work on Monday. And you're going to be playing the role of an electrical engineer. I'll rewrite your CV for you." So I turned up at this client's office, having tried to do revision over the weekend, with a CV in my hand that said I had a degree in electrical engineering and 4 years work experience. And I've never been more nervous in my entire life, and I somehow got away with it. Thankfully, a fairly lenient boss, or not lenient, just quite a soft boss, I suppose, not particularly driven or hard charging, and the work ended up being not hugely challenging. So I managed to get away with that for a 1 month secondment turned into 8 months, believe it or not. But I was living. I find it quite funny. I'm not condoning this behavior. There was nothing dangerous about the work I was doing. Everything was checked and rechecked, and if I wasn't adding value, I wouldn't have been kept on. But yeah, I was just essentially living a lie for 8 months. I mean, I couldn't talk about my time in Whistler. I couldn't talk about the truck driving that I was doing at night shifts on a Friday night. I couldn't do any of that. Just funny times.
So you do know the other side of not being authentic, then, Jim?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, I never considered that, Paul. That's probably one of the biggest drivers. Actually, might be a subconscious driver. God, that felt rubbish.
That's fantastic.
Oh, Jim, thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I really think that this conversation will tie in with another guest. We spoke to Nikki Bass, she's got a podcast called The Everyday Podcast. And we're going to be releasing her episode with yours within series 6. And you have very different styles, but you're both really placing adventure at the heart of your work, which was a theme that we hadn't considered before in kind of coaching outdoors, coaching with nature, across this niche, for want of a better word. So hopefully it really gives a flavour how you can both move towards something and just do it really authentically within your own style.
Yeah, and for anyone out there who's thinking, oh, I'm not adventurous, or I don't have any accreditations or first aid or anything like that. I don't have any of that either. But just keep it simple. Just take a client for a walk if you can. If they're close by, even if they're not, if they're on Zoom or a phone call. I've had numerous walks around the lanes here with clients over in North America, where they're on a call, they're walking, I'm on a call, I'm walking, and there's just even that brings a little element of adventure and movement into the work. So for anyone who's thinking about it, just start small. But I do know Nikki actually not very well. We exchanged messages on LinkedIn many years ago. So she does some really cool work.
Yeah, perfect. So any final words?
Not from me, other than to say thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for the encouragement to sit outside. I wouldn't have been sat outside for this normally, obviously with the audio and everything else, but I'm really glad I have done. Hopefully I haven't been squinting too much, but and I hope it's been valuable for you guys and for anyone listening. I think coaching is fantastic. If you haven't got a coach, find one. If you are thinking of doing coaching and you're only touching, dipping your toe in, just keep going, because it's an amazing world.
No, Jim,
thank you, and thank you for the efforts as well of heading outside into your garden. If you've been watching, you can kind of see the background. If you're listening, it is sunny in Bradford-on-Avon. But no, thank you for your time, Jim, and I'm sure there's loads of nuggets in there for people to kind of get a hold of. So thank you for listening in, everybody who has been. It's been an absolute pleasure having you listening in to our conversation today. Clearly, this is one podcast of many. We've got 5 series that you might not have stumbled across before. So if you haven't, do take time to check them out and let us know what you think as well. Thoughts, comments, and what do you want more of? Is there anyone that you would like us to reach out to, that you'd like to hear from? We're always looking for future guests of the podcast as well. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.